I started with a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood and I ended up cutting out 4 12-inch panels for the sides and the top and the bottom, and 4 11-inch wide panels for the shelves and the inside piece. I have some missed footage here, but to glue it up, basically laid all the panels out on my table and glued the sides up and drew some screws through it through the outside, and then put the middle panel in last. So for the legs, I just put in some mitered 2x4s to make it look nice. Kind of regret doing this because it really affected the stability of the shelf overall. Then I took some of my 11-inch wide pieces of plywood and I started cutting them up to length to make the shelves. So I had a couple of scrap pieces of plywood and I tested out pocket holes with 1-inch long screws, and it just seemed kind of flimsy to me, and so I decided here, and this is probably the biggest mistake of this, is I decided to not use pocket hole screws and just run the screws in through the outside of the panels. And this ended up being kind of a painful experience, and it really took me forever. One of the biggest issues was that I pre-drilled the holes and then the screws weren't really catching on, and so what ended up happening is I had to replace a bunch of screws with longer ones so that they would catch, and then even then I still ended up having a bunch of kind of problems with wood getting messed up after the screws being driven through it. Then to make the trim, I just milled some 2x4s, and so I started off by squaring up the edges to make it square, and then I chopped it in half lengthwise, and then I just cut it down to width on my table saw. Once I had the pieces cut to width, I cut them to length and to the right angle with my miter saw. The customer came in to check on the order, and then also ended up giving me a hand putting on this trim around the shelf.
Alright, so this piece is pretty much done now. I just gotta sand it and paint it. I want to run through a couple mistakes that I made so you don't make the same mistakes. Very embarrassing mistakes that I shouldn't have made, but yet here we are. So the first mistake is that I didn't drill pocket hole screws. For some reason I thought I was going to just pull in the screws through the outside and it would be kind of fine. So what I did is I pre-drilled the holes, and then I put the screws in there, and I ran into two problems. So first of all, the screw was not catching, and so the head of the screw was still sticking out in most cases. I had to go and replace it with a bigger screw, with a longer screw, and that caused some tear out on some of the shelves. Another issue I ran into is that some of these shelves are fit a little bit too snugly, so you can't see it from the front, but if I walk around on the back, there's a slight bow on this left side that I only realized after I already glued and screwed in the shelf. But it's kind of minor, so I don't think it's really going to be a big deal. And so yeah, definitely I would not build another shelf out of maybe 1/2-inch plywood, or I would definitely use pocket hole screws. I tried it on a couple of test pieces and it didn't really feel that sturdy to me, so I decided, what's the point, let me just drive the screws in from the outside, and boy did I regret that decision. Another problem that I had is when I cut up the plywood with my circular saw, some of the edges came up at a slight angle, so I'm not sure what was happening. I noticed this before in another project as well. I don't know if it's the way I'm holding the saw or something wrong with my blade, and I didn't notice it until it was too late, and this affected like how some of this trim kind of came on here. So it doesn't really match up all the way around because there's like a high point and a low point on some of these pieces. But nevertheless, I think it's fine for my first shelf. So I'm gonna sand it and then paint it and then be done.
So then I tried to cover as many holes as I could with wood filler, and then gave it just a quick sand. Took a couple pictures here of what it looks like before we started painting it. And so the customer came back and helped me put the first coat of white paint on it.
Alright, and so this is after the first coat has dried. I got my helpers here for the second coat. So this is where I'm at after the second coat and a very light third coat. After sanding, I remembered that I forgot to patch the holes up with the wood filler. Don't ask me how I forgot. But anyway, so I just patched them up. I'm gonna wait until it dries, sand them down, and then put another coat just on this frame. So at this point, it's pretty much done. I think I'm gonna come back here with the kids and run through some colorful paint patterns and maybe put some lines on here. They'll probably like that and just decorate it a little bit. But yeah, I mean overall, lots of lessons learned. Definitely, I would use more glue. Definitely, I would use the pocket screws for the pocket holes for the shelves. I can still see some of the screw marks here. I don't know if you can tell it on the video, but you know, it didn't really kind of all go away. Also, one lesson that I took away from this is when you get in the trim, I think next time I'm going to assemble it and measure it like without putting it on this. Right, so I'll cut it, I'll glue it up and make sure that it's all even and flush, and then I'll take that whole thing and I'll just nail it to this. That's going to require some more precise cutting, but I think that would look way better than what we have now. And yeah, well, I hope you learned something from my mistakes here. And if you have a better way of doing this or you want to leave me some feedback, go ahead and drop me something in the comments. Thanks for watching.
And so this is what it ended up looking like after the custom paint job, which is totally optional, by the way.